Shattering the grand hall's tense silence, an authoritative voice officially declares the complete and absolute annulment of Lady Elmo Tort's royal engagement. Standing frozen in her elegant blue gown, the silver-haired noblewoman stares forward with wide, profoundly shocked eyes as the devastating reality sets in. Flashing a ruthless, immensely confident smirk, the blonde prince cruelly delivers his heartless verdict without a single shred of remorse. Maintaining an ironclad composure, Elmo tilts her head upward with a deeply stoic expression to mask the massive storm of emotions brewing inside her. Mentally acknowledging her grim fate, the devastated noblewoman silently realizes that her predetermined role in this twisted scenario is finally over. Suppressing her completely dry tears, Elmo bows gracefully instead of crying out in agonizing despair over Lord Eldred's cruel rejection. Raising her head with unyielding dignity, she looks directly at Prince Eldred Ferrez and firmly accepts the official annulment of their engagement. Gazing down in quiet resignation, Elmo silently admits to herself that she completely anticipated this utterly tragic outcome. A tight, highly tense close-up reveals her trembling lips and delicate collarbone as the heavy weight of her public humiliation presses down on her. Squeezing her eyes tightly shut, the elegant villainess forces herself to endure the stinging shame radiating from the watching aristocrats. Watching the prince turn his back on her to comfort another girl, Elmo pieces together the agonizing reason behind his harsh betrayal. Dropping a massive, world-shattering revelation, Elmo confesses that she was actually reincarnated into an Otome game as the ultimate villainess. Plunging into a chaotic flashback, a frantic 12-year-old Elmo clutches her head in agonizing pain as memories of her previous life violently awaken. Outlining the magical game's core premise, she desperately recalls the complex narrative centered around a special girl loved by powerful spirit beasts. Set deep within the fairy-inhabited kingdom of Ferrez, the beloved heroine Lilia joyfully deepens her romantic bonds with various handsome suitors. Staring blankly ahead, Elmo tragically identifies Prince Eldred as her former fiancé and one of the game's primary love interests. Connecting the dots with pure logic, she concludes that her broken engagement definitively proves the game has entered Eldred's specific romantic route. A dark shadow falls over her expression as she grimly reveals that this specific storyline conceals a highly dangerous, hidden path. Reflecting on their childhood encounter, she remembers how Lilia and Eldred permanently bonded over saving a magical white tiger spirit beast. Consuming the kingdom with sheer malice, the jealous villainous Elmo canonically unleashes a devastating fever plague to destroy the royal capital. Waging a ferocious, earth-shattering battle to cure the plague, the awakened Saintess Lilia and the evil Elmo clash alongside their mighty spirit tigers. Blood dripping violently from her mouth in the chaotic vision, Elmo shudders as she anticipates meeting a truly gruesome and painful end. Sitting quietly in the bouncing carriage, she analyzes the missing spirit beasts and realizes her current reality has dangerously derailed from the plot. Staring out the small wooden window, Elmo fiercely prays that this annulment doesn't magically trigger the hidden route leading to her absolute worst ending. Lowering her gaze with profound resolve, the exiled noblewoman decides that quietly accepting her fate and leaving will keep her completely safe. Stepping gracefully down from the wooden carriage, a newly determined Elmo prepares to embrace her completely unknown future. Gazing up at the rustic architecture, she realizes she has finally arrived in the remote, vastly peaceful mountain kingdom of Sarthia. Lush, beautifully overgrown foliage rustles warmly in the gentle breeze as the bright sun radiates over her brand new beginning. Clenching her fists with blazing determination, the runaway villainess passionately vows to live a peaceful life entirely unrelated to the game's plot. Gripping her heavy suitcase tightly, she pragmatically decides that finding a safe house is her absolute first priority. Wandering far from Sarthia's royal capital, Elmo navigates a quiet-edge town specifically to secure humble, everyday work. Approaching a quaint wooden fence, the blonde girl politely calls out to visit the local landlady and kickstart her independent life. A warm, deeply welcoming voice instantly calls back from inside the modest house, eagerly responding to Elmo's polite greeting. Stepping out to greet her new visitor, the cheerful old landlady curiously asks the young traveler who she might be. Blushing slightly with eager anticipation, Elmo nervously stammers out a highly respectful introduction to the kind woman. The rustic, highly detailed stone chimney of the landlady's house stands tall against the bright, incredibly cloudy afternoon sky. Quickly understanding the runaway's dire situation, the perceptive landlady mentions a nearby farmhouse and field that have been abandoned for years. Leaning in with massive excitement, Elmo gasps in shock before the grinning landlady firmly halts her joy with a serious warning. Lowering her voice to a dramatic whisper, the old woman bluntly reveals that all the local townsfolk consider that specific house completely haunted. Utterly frozen by the sudden supernatural twist, the blonde girl repeats the terrifying word in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Laughing off the creepy rumor, the cheerful landlady casually confirms that a ghost supposedly appears on the abandoned property. Sweating nervously at the daunting prospect, Elmo tightly clenches her jaw and bravely reminds herself that she never believed in ghosts anyway. Violently thrust into a traumatizing flashback, Elmo remembers her furious parents physically striking her for failing to capture the prince's heart. A deeply crushing memory surfaces of the vicious, completely fabricated rumors spread by ruthless nobles to destroy her reputation. Recalling Lilia's deceitful nature, Elmo grimaces at the memory of the selfish heroine who lied endlessly to fulfill her own twisted desires. Flashing back to her ex-fiancé's terrifyingly cold eyes, the hardened Villainess fiercely declares that real humans are far scarier than any imaginary ghost. Breaking through her dark thoughts, the caring landlady gently checks on the deeply zoned-out girl to make sure she is all right. Flashing a remarkably bright and reassuring smile, the old woman kindly asks if she wants to go inspect the haunted property right now. Snapping back to the hopeful present, a highly determined Elmo eagerly accepts the offer and firmly pushes her dark past aside. Turning to lead the way down the dirt path, the cheerful landlady commands Elmo to follow her straight toward her mysterious new home. Arriving at the property, the friendly landlady firmly offers to unlock the front door while Elmo eagerly agrees. Stepping inside, the young noblewoman gasps in absolute amazement at the stunning interior of her potential new home. Overjoyed by the beautifully constructed house, Elmo is utterly shocked when the older woman casually offers it to her entirely for free. Stunned by the unbelievable generosity, she loudly questions the offer while the landlady simply nods in calm confirmation. Gazing around the fully furnished space, she realizes a beautiful property with a sprawling garden is miraculously hers without a single coin exchanged. Knowing she would never find such a perfect house anywhere else, the runaway Villainess urgently prepares her final answer. With unshakable resolve, Elmo firmly declares her immediate decision to live in the abandoned farmhouse. Smiling warmly, the accommodating landlady hands over the heavy brass key to officially finalize the unexpected transaction. Clutching the key to her wonderful new home, Elmo gratefully nods as the older woman invites her to visit if anything goes wrong. Left completely alone, the young woman silently surveys the vast space with a lingering sense of pure disbelief. Scanning the grand dining table, spacious kitchen, and queen-sized bed, she marvels at the sheer immense size of her new sanctuary. Venturing into the massive study filled with countless books, she realizes the grand estate provides far more space than a single person could ever need. Examining the pristine furniture left behind, she nervously wonders if the previous owner fled in sheer terror of the rumored ghosts. Shaking off the eerie thoughts, the determined girl tightly rolls up her sleeves to face the demanding reality of her new life. Charging forward, she immediately decides to air out the heavy bedding and fiercely tackle the massive cleaning job. Wiping sweat from her brow, she victoriously declares her rigorous and exhausting cleaning efforts a complete success. Fresh air violently rushes through the fully opened windows, breathing revitalizing life into the freshly aired bedding. Admiring her spotless handiwork, she proudly notes that her exhaustive dusting of the old furniture is absolutely perfect. Discovering a complete lack of running water, she mentally plans to ask the helpful landlady about the plumbing situation tomorrow. Pivoting to her final task, she decisively opens her luggage to carefully organize her few remaining personal belongings. Sorting through her meager possessions, she evaluates a small pouch of coins, some sellable valuables, and her basic daily garments. Realizing her massive stroke of luck in securing a free house, she calculates that selling her valuables will happily buy her a long break from working. Stretching her exhausted limbs, she happily permits herself to finally relax for the remainder of the long and eventful day. Exciting visions flood her mind as she eagerly dreams of reading books in bed, planting vegetable seeds, and baking delicious homemade bread. Overcome by sudden exhaustion, the weary noblewoman decides to surrender to a deep, rejuvenating, and unusually early sleep. Drifting into a heavy slumber, she remains completely oblivious to the torrential rain beginning to violently batter the house. Vicious winds and blinding rain fiercely crash against the sturdy wooden frame of the isolated and darkened farmhouse. Shifting restlessly beneath her thick blankets, she subconsciously reacts to the raging storm violently tearing through the night sky. Deafening thunder rattles the enormous glass windows as the unforgiving tempest violently consumes the massive estate. Relentless sheets of freezing rain fiercely pound the glass, completely isolating the silent house from the rest of the frightened world. Groggily stirring from her deep sleep, Elmo slowly cracks open her heavy eyes as the deafening storm continues to rage outside. Listening to the violent downpour, she lazily wonders if the terrible rain will finally cease by the time morning arrives. Drifting back towards sleep, a sudden and bizarre realization forcefully jolts her exhausted mind partially awake. Inhaling deeply, the confused girl fiercely questions the strangely pleasant and unnatural scent lingering heavily in the cold air. Baffled by her surroundings, she explicitly remembers leaving the massive windows wide open for days before she even moved in. Shocked by the immaculate state of the room, she realizes the air lacks any dusty scent and her bedding is suspiciously soft and fluffy. An icy spike of pure dread pierces her heart as she finally realizes something is horribly and dangerously wrong. Fighting desperately against her heavy eyelids, her exhausted brain violently fails to process the terrifying warning signs. Overpowered by immense unnatural fatigue, the weary girl instantly collapses back into a deep and defenseless slumber. Blinding morning sunlight violently pierces the quiet bedroom as Elmo softly groans under the intensely warm rays. Stretching her refreshed limbs, she blissfully wonders what time it is and marvels at her incredibly peaceful night of sleep. Reaching blindly across the spacious mattress, her delicate hand suddenly collides with a firm, solid, and completely unexpected obstacle. Giving the strange object a firm and curious squeeze, she instantly registers the undeniable texture of warm human flesh. Springing awake in absolute terror, she realizes a living person is sleeping directly beside her and quickly dismisses the foolish ghost rumors. Heart pounding fiercely in her chest, the panicked girl stares downward to uncover the true identity of the mysterious intruder quickly. Paralyzed by utter disbelief, she gasps out loud as her wide eyes land on the stunningly attractive face of a sleeping stranger. Momentarily mesmerized by his breathtaking features, she violently shakes her head to snap back to the dangerous reality of the situation. Horrified by the scandalous scene, Elmo mentally screams as she realizes the gorgeous man in her bed is completely shirtless. Panic sharply floods her veins as she wildly assumes the intruder is a dangerous pervert who maliciously snuck in during the chaotic storm. Peeking nervously under the messy blankets, she releases a massive sigh of relief upon discovering the mysterious man is thankfully wearing pants. In the bizarre and unexpected situation, an incredibly anxious girl desperately wonders if the unconscious man resting beside her is simply a pervert who just wants to sleep next to vulnerable girls. Stirring from his deep slumber with a groggy murmur, the young man suddenly begins to wake up right beside her, causing the startled girl to let out a shocked gasp. Sitting up while rubbing his bleary eyes, the shirtless man groggily turns toward the unfamiliar intruder and directly asks her who she is. Overwhelmed by his sudden awakening and half-naked state, the blonde girl gasps loudly in absolute panic as she visibly recoils from the stranger. Demanding answers with frantic energy, she furiously questions his identity while implying that this location rightfully belongs to her. Flashing a confident smirk without a shred of hesitation, the young man dismisses her frantic accusations and boldly proclaims that he is the actual owner of this house. Stammering in utter disbelief, the devastated girl forcefully argues that the old landlady explicitly gave this house to her. Pinching the bridge of his nose in sheer exasperation, the annoyed boy sighs heavily as he realizes this is yet another one of his grandmother's confusing schemes. The puzzle together, the girl wonders how many times this ridiculous situation has happened and anxiously questions if she was supposed to be away because she believed this house was completely abandoned. Raising his voice to ensure crystal-clear communication, the young man firmly reiterates his previous stance and vehemently declares that this house is absolutely not abandoned. Tears of sheer frustration welling in her eyes, the devastated girl desperately asks what she is supposed to do now while begging him to clarify what he means. Leaning in with a serious expression, the boy reveals a deeply hidden secret, cryptically stating that this is not just any ordinary house. Dropping a massive revelation that leaves the girl completely flabbergasted, he loudly proclaims that this estate is actually the hidden home of a wizard. Transported into a breathtaking flashback, the narrative reveals the two characters sitting inside an incredibly ornate, magical library filled with ancient academic tomes. Solidifying his outrageous and supernatural claim, The boy confidently repeats that this grand estate is, after all, a practicing mage's house. Staring her down with unyielding certainty, he affirms his statement without a single ounce of doubt, confirming once again that he is indeed a mage. Reaching casually toward the overhead kitchen cabinets, the shirtless mage complains about the massive pain of the situation and remarks that he now has to go visit his grandma's house to sort it out. Igniting a sudden burst of magical energy, a bright flame spontaneously materializes in the room, leaving the girl to watch in absolute awe. A remarkably intricate coffee dripper floats elegantly in the air, seemingly operating on pure magical energy that completely defies all known physics. Gazing intensely at the floating brewing apparatus, the deeply astounded girl whispers a question to the empty air, wondering if this miraculous display is actually real magic. Reminiscing about her formal education with genuine wonder, she breathlessly admits that they only ever learned about such things in class and she never thought practical magic actually existed. Completely overwhelmed by his casual display of immense power, the blonde girl turns to him with burning curiosity and directly asks him who exactly he is. Pausing his magical brewing for a brief second, the young mage hums softly in casual acknowledgement as he turns his attention back to the highly inquisitive girl. Flipping the question back onto her, the boy boldly asks about her identity first before revealing that he is 18 years old and introducing himself as Gru. Blushing profusely under his intense gaze, the nervous girl tightly clutches her frilly dress and formally introduces herself as Elmo. Taking a casual sip from his freshly brewed coffee, Gru silently notes Elmo's oddly polite demeanor as she introduces her age, prompting him to ponder her unique name. Suddenly shattering her polite facade, Elmo aggressively chomps down on a massive piece of freshly baked bread with unapologetic ferocity. Catching her right in the act of blatant thievery, Gru spins around holding his coffee mug and dramatically yells that she is eating his bread. Flashing a wicked, teasing grin as she guiltily swallows the stolen food, Gru leans in and playfully asks if that bread was actually hers. Defensively claiming she only helped herself to a little, Elmo listens to Gru chuckle darkly as he tells her not to use that phrase while smugly noting his magical bread tastes better than usual. Establishing his dominant authority over the household, Gru strictly declares that since he is graciously letting her stay here, the stolen bread will serve as her official lodging fee. Completely outraged by his absurd transactional logic, Elmo fiercely rejects the concept of a lodging fee and loudly vows that she is not leaving. Squaring up to her defiant posture, Gru aggressively reminds Elmo that this property was his house to begin with and firmly commands her to go back to her own home. Dropping her aggressive facade, Elmo's expression shatters into genuine despair as she tragically confesses that going back is completely impossible for her. Caught completely off guard by her sudden vulnerability, Gru's frustrated demeanor instantly softens into sheer confusion as he tries to process the heavy emotional weight of her confession. Piecing her tragic story together with a softened tone, Gru connects the dots and softly asks if she is actually a runaway girl. Staring solemnly at the floor, Elmo devastatingly reveals that she didn't run away, but rather, she was forcefully thrown out of her own home. Struck by the sheer tragedy of her circumstances, Gru crosses his arms and stares at her in profound, stunned silence as the heavy atmosphere thickens. Remaining completely silent, the young mage observes the devastated girl with a deeply contemplative gaze that thoroughly extinguishes his previous irritation. Sighing heavily while scratching the back of his neck, Gru finally breaks the tense silence, clearly resigning himself to the complicated situation of housing a homeless girl. Walking over to the downtrodden girl, Gru aggressively but kindly shoves a warm mug of magical coffee into her trembling hands in a sudden gesture of hospitality. Staring down at the steaming beverage in her hands, Elmo stutters quietly in pure bewilderment as the comforting warmth begins to thaw her freezing panic. Turning his back to give her privacy, Gru loudly commands Elmo to wait right there while he goes to change his clothes. Watching his retreating, Elmo's eyes widen in silent realization as the sheer kindness hidden beneath his incredibly rough exterior shatters her terrifying assumptions. The beautifully crafted mug radiates a profoundly soothing and magical heat between her trembling palms, anchoring her desperately frantic mind to the present reality. Taking a slow sip of the magical brew, Elmo softly comments on its sweet flavor, internally realizing with a gentle blush that Gru might not actually be a bad person after all. Returning to the room fully dressed in his official mage's cloak, Gru firmly announces with strict authority that they are heading directly to his grandma's place right now. Diving frantically under the bedsheets to escape his command, Elmo stubbornly screams her absolute refusal, prompting Gru to loudly yell that they are leaving regardless. Forcefully yanking the heavy blankets off her hiding spot, Gru angrily warns her that he has his own ways of dealing with stubbornness, logically pointing out they cannot keep living like this forever. Employing sheer physical force, the young mage forcefully drags the loudly protesting girl out of bed to conclude the chaotic morning and confront the mastermind behind this ridiculous ordeal. Frantically reaching out to halt his sudden movements, Elmo desperately yells for the young mage to wait a second. Ignoring her protests entirely, Gru swiftly scoops the startled girl up into his arms in a fluid, dominant motion. Blushing furiously as he holds her tightly against his chest, Gru firmly declares that he can easily carry her there like this. Visibly flustered by the overwhelming close contact, Gru stammers out that he is embarrassed too, before anxiously asking if she is really okay with his bold move. Panicking entirely under his intense grip, Elmo desperately begs him to put her down, loudly promising that she will willingly walk on her own. Bursting through the door fully dressed in his official cloak, Gru loudly announces their arrival and casually asks his grandmother if she is home. A short, elderly woman casually notes the noisy entrance, recognizing Gru immediately and calmly asking what the matter is. Looming over the old lady in absolute exasperation, Gru furiously accuses her of making up weird stories when he only intended to go out and pick medicinal herbs. Completely ignoring his furious rant, the grinning grandmother gestures for him to come closer and cheekily points out just how cute the blonde girl is. Trembling nervously behind Gru's protective cloak, Elmo stutters out a timid question as she wonders what exactly is going on. The trio stands in the room, a heavy and slightly awkward silence settling between the fiercely glaring Gru, the cheerful grandmother, and the incredibly anxious Elmo. Gru's face flushes completely red with sheer, unfiltered panic as he lets out a violently shocked shout. Pointedly confronting her meddling, he angrily yells at his grandmother for always interfering and making things official when she had absolutely no right to do so. Chuckling lightly with a sly grin, the cunning grandmother casually defends her matchmaking, reasoning that Gru would never make a move on his own unless she forcefully pushed him. Outraged by her blatant disrespect for boundaries, Gru fiercely retorts that her flawed logic has absolutely nothing to do with this bizarre situation. Looking back at the deeply confused Elmo, Gru devastatingly argues that there is no way someone like him could ever make a move on such a cute girl. Tearing at his hair in absolute frustration, Gru desperately tries to deny the situation while his grandmother bursts into joyous laughter, thrilled that he finally confessed his true thoughts. Grabbing his grandmother's collar in a frantic state, Gru desperately wonders what to do, entirely ignoring Elmo's hesitant attempt to speak up. The grandmother just laughs heartily as Gru glares down at her with a thoroughly exhausted and deeply flustered expression. Standing quietly to the side, Elmo watches the chaotic familial exchange with wide, observant eyes. Slowly gathering her fleeting courage, the blonde girl nervously clasps her trembling hands tightly together. Stepping protectively in front of the old woman, Gru firmly commands his grandmother to stop making Elmo feel uncomfortable. Lowering his tone to a serious murmur, Gru adds a crucial caveat to the conversation. Standing tall with a determined, unwavering gaze, the young mage officially declares that he still has something deeply important he needs to accomplish. Smiling warmly at her flustered grandson, the grandmother softly assures Gru that it is perfectly okay even if things do not ultimately work out. Clenching his fist over his chest with burning resolve, Gru fiercely vows that he absolutely will not give up. Turning his gaze toward the astonished Elmo, Gru confidently reassures his grandmother that he is no longer alone, bringing a tearful smile of pride to the old lady's face. Catching onto a sudden realization, Gru pauses mid-thought as a brand new idea clearly strikes him. Taking a respectful step back, Elmo firmly decides that an outsider like her has no business listening to such a personal family matter. Despite her resolve to politely step away, a sudden wave of desperation washes over her as she remembers her dire situation. Raising her voice with sheer determination, Elmo desperately interjects, realizing she has no choice but to rely on their incredible kindness. Bowing her head humbly, she formally pleads for permission to stay at one of their homes until she can successfully secure a proper job. Taken completely off guard by her incredibly polite request, Gru stammers in surprise while his grandmother beams with absolute radiant delight. Rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly, Gru admits he doesn't mind her staying but hesitates to give a full, immediate confirmation. Seizing the perfect opportunity to play matchmaker, the grinning grandmother happily points out that her own house is far too cramped for two people to live in comfortably. Flashing a charming, highly confident smirk, Gru seamlessly accepts his grandmother's logic and steps into the role of a generous host. Excitingly informing her of his upcoming schedule, Gru brightly offers Elmo his empty house to stay in since he will be out gathering medicinal herbs starting tomorrow. Overwhelmed by sheer gratitude, Elmo's hands eagerly clasp together in a tight, immensely joyful grip. Stepping right into his personal space with sparkling eyes, Elmo loudly thanks Gru, leaving the young mage completely shocked by her sudden proximity. Blushing wildly at her innocent touch, Gru frantically commands Elmo to let go of his hand immediately. Quickly releasing her grip in a blind panic, Elmo hastily apologizes, bashfully admitting that she simply got too happy without thinking. Breaking the tense atmosphere, the grandmother calls out Elmo's name with a gentle, deeply knowing smile. Bowing her head respectfully, the old lady sincerely apologizes for all the sudden chaos they have unfortunately caused her. Waving her hands frantically to dismiss the apology, Elmo humbly begs the grandmother not to worry about it at all. Stepping back with a newfound burst of vibrant energy, the blonde girl prepares to take definitive action. Brightly announcing her temporary departure, Elmo explains she needs to go out until evening to formally find a new place to stay, which Gru calmly acknowledges. Excusing herself politely, she turns and confidently walks out into the lush, beautifully overgrown forest surrounding the property. Resolving not to selfishly take advantage of their hospitality, Elmo fiercely promises herself to quickly find a live-in job so she doesn't rely on their kindness forever. Pumping her fists with blazing determination, the runaway girl strides forward into the radiant sunlight, passionately vowing to do her absolute best. Back inside the quiet house, Gru turns his focused attention back to his scheming grandmother to address the remaining elephant in the room. Hesitating with his words, the young mage gently touches his chin as he attempts to explain his complicated feelings to his grandmother. Smiling warmly at her grandson's hesitation, the perceptive old woman casually points out his obvious affection for Elmo and guarantees she won't stand in his way. A heavy atmosphere settles over the room as Gru averts his gaze, quietly acknowledging her support while a lingering doubt clouds his mind. His sharp eyes narrow in profound apprehension as an unspoken secret threatens to shatter the fragile peace he has just found. Clutching his cloak in quiet desperation, Gru tragically confesses his terrifying fear that revealing his true, non-human form will inevitably make Elmo hate him. Turning her back with a solemn nod, the grandmother gently validates his deep-seated anxieties by affirming the stark differences between their kind and ordinary humans. Casting a serious glance toward his grandmother, Gru quietly emphasizes that her particular lineage makes the situation even more complicated. A sudden spark of unexpected optimism flickers in his chest as he begins to reconsider the blonde girl's incredibly accepting nature. Looking off into the distance with a hopeful expression, the young mage admits a strange feeling that Elmo might actually accept his monstrous reality. Leaning forward in pure shock, Gru violently demands to know what evidence his grandmother has to support such a wild assumption. Chuckling with absolutely joyous laughter, the old woman proudly declares herself as the perfect example of such a miraculous cross-species romance. Gesturing affectionately toward a nearby table, the grinning grandmother happily seeks validation from the memory of her late husband. A framed portrait of a distinguished man rests peacefully beside a vase of dried flowers, silently anchoring the grandmother's beautiful romantic history. Nostalgically recalling their perfect love story, she proudly boasts that their incredibly close relationship was once the burning envy of the entire village. A stunned, absolute silence completely overtakes the room as the heavy weight of her romantic reminiscing settles over the young mage. Sweat dropping nervously from his face, Gru awkwardly stammers out a weak response to her overwhelmingly confident display of affection. A beautifully carved wooden coat rack stands quietly in the corner of the room, patiently holding the garments of the magical household. Shifting the conversation toward domestic comforts, a steady stream of steaming tea pours elegantly from a kettle into a waiting ceramic mug. Holding her warm beverage with a deeply satisfied smile, the grandmother sighs in absolute contentment as the peaceful atmosphere returns. Calling out to catch her attention, Gru seamlessly pivots the topic of conversation back to the highly mysterious runaway girl staying in his home. Sitting down with a contemplative expression, the young mage notes Elmo's remarkably noble mannerisms and connects them to her tragic lack of a home. Her eyes crinkling in delighted amusement, the old woman happily entertains the fascinating idea that their new guest is secretly a noble lady. Frowning in deep concentration, Gru thoroughly analyzes the complete lack of local rumors regarding any exiled nobles despite Elmo's undeniable grace. Quietly absorbing his logical deduction, the grandmother softly agrees that her incredibly refined posture must mean she hails from a distant land. Taking a determined sip of his tea, Gru vows to handle the situation in his own way while his grandmother joyfully imagines Elmo smiling as his future bride. Flushing with sheer embarrassment at her relentless teasing, Gru loudly protests while the old woman laughs off his easily flustered nature. Standing up with a renewed sense of purpose, Gru officially announces his departure to deliver magical potions to the capital's guild. Adjusting his heavy cloak over his shoulder, he politely asks if she needs any errands run before stepping out the door. Flashing a confident grin, Gru happily accepts his grandmother's enthusiastic request to bring back the capital's famous cream puffs for both her and Elmo. Stepping into a remarkably vibrant town square, Elmo stares in absolute awe at the bustling crowd and beautiful architecture surrounding her. Navigating carefully through the dense sea of busy townsfolk, the blonde girl takes in the lively atmosphere of the unfamiliar settlement. Scanning the vibrant environment, she happily observes the countless food stalls lined up perfectly along the bustling cobblestone streets. Her sharp eyes dart across the commercial district as she searches for the perfect opportunity to secure her own independence. Spotting a familiar establishment, she notes the presence of a simple adventurers guild nestled right among the local businesses. Tapping her chin in deep thought, Elmo pragmatically decides that working in a lively food stall would be an excellent fit for her new life. Clenching her fist with burning resolve, the runaway girl pumps herself up to start actively hunting for an available shop position. Staring intensely at a handwritten job board, Elmo's eyes narrow as she carefully evaluates the available employment options before her. Scanning the limited part-time listings for a bakery, diner, and tavern, she fiercely prioritizes finding a live-in job to solve her housing crisis. Pondering her exact schedule, the ambitious girl imagines herself energetically serving bread during the day or hauling drinks at a tavern by night. Calculating her immediate options, she realizes with slight disappointment that both the bakery and diner have already closed for the afternoon. Pressing her hands gently against a wooden window frame, Elmo peers curiously into a shadowy establishment to gauge its current atmosphere. A rustic wooden sign depicting a frothy mug of beer swings gently above the entrance, clearly marking the building as a local tavern. Peeking carefully inside the dimly lit room, she observes a highly energetic crowd of patrons already drinking heavily before evening has even fallen. Spying a waitress hard at work, Elmo's attention is immediately captured by the exceptionally frilly and revealing uniform required for the job. Staring blankly at the bustling scene, she nervously evaluates the intensely cute but highly impractical work attire with a critical eye. Her gaze fixes directly on the heavily emphasized chest design of the outfit, causing a massive wave of self-doubt to crash over her. Examining the bottom half of the uniform, she anxiously notes the incredibly short, ruffled skirt that leaves almost nothing to the imagination. Sweating nervously as she compares her own modest figure to the demanding outfit, Elmo frantically wonders if she could even pull off such a look. A close-up of her simple dotted dress highlights the stark, conservative contrast between her current clothing and the tavern's wildly revealing uniform. Startled out of her deep concentration by a sudden shout, Elmo lets out a terrified shriek as a familiar voice loudly calls out to her from behind. Startled by her sudden appearance at the bustling tavern, Gru firmly warns the trembling Elmo that a bad man will inevitably snatch her away if she lingers in such a dangerous establishment. Unfazed by the massive commotion, the rowdy tavern patrons eagerly welcome Gru and loudly question if he specifically came down to enjoy a drink with them. Grasping his heavy cloak with sudden excitement, Elmo urgently begs Gru to accompany her inside so she can finally witness what the lively tavern looks like. Eagerly suggesting they enter together, Elmo lets out a violently startled squeak as the young mage suddenly takes highly decisive action. Gripping her hand firmly, a completely serious Gru abruptly drags the highly confused blonde girl entirely away from the noisy tavern entrance. Staring up at his tense profile in sheer bewilderment, Elmo innocently asks why he is leaving when he supposedly came here to drink. Refusing to let her stay a second longer, Gru fiercely declares that such places are far too dangerous for her and forcefully commands that they are going straight home. Hoping for a tiny hint of affection, Elmo gently asks if he came to rescue her out of worry, only for Gru to instantly and bluntly shut down the notion. Catching her incredibly radiant expression as they walk hand in hand, Gru confusedly asks why she is smiling while Elmo happily realizes he truly is a kind person. Blushing deeply with a gentle, secretive smile, Elmo quickly brushes off his burning question and playfully claims it is absolutely nothing. Bathed in the warm, radiant glow of the afternoon sun, the two seamlessly walk hand in hand all the way back to the quiet safety of the mage's estate. The beautifully crafted, isolated forest home stands peacefully among the towering trees as they return from the wildly bustling town. Breaking the tense silence, Gru directly questions if Elmo honestly intended to work in such a rough, wildly inappropriate establishment. Lowering her gaze with a deeply serious expression, the runaway girl quietly confirms that she indeed planned to take the dangerous tavern job. Furious at the mere thought of her in danger, Gru loudly declares that she should simply live with him and help out during the day instead of working at that awful tavern. Completely stunned by his unexpectedly generous offer, Elmo freezes in place and lets out a breathless gasp of pure, unfiltered shock. Snapping out of her daze with wildly sparkling eyes, Elmo frantically asks if he truly means she can permanently stay in his home. Flashing a confident, deeply reassuring smile, Gru boldly promises that he never goes back on his word, prompting a massively joyful cheer from the blonde girl. Softening his tone to offer genuine comfort, the young mage gently reminds her that she has no home to return to and can absolutely rely on them. Overwhelmed by the sheer warmth of his boundless hospitality, Elmo nervously clutches her dress and softly wonders if she truly deserves to be treated with such incredible kindness. A horribly dark memory violently resurfaces in her mind, thrusting her back to a painful past where cruel, mocking nobles coldly cast her aside. The tragic flashback heavily deepens, revealing the brutal reality of her former existence where heartless aristocrats constantly looked down on her with sheer disdain. Snapped violently back to the present reality, a single, heavy tear escapes her trembling eye as the overwhelming contrast between her painful past and Gru's kindness shatters her emotional walls. Heavy tears cascade uncontrollably down her flushed cheeks as she stares at the young mage, completely overcome by a massive tidal wave of pure gratitude. Her incredibly wide, tear-filled eyes reflect the profound emotional release as years of lonely suffering finally begin to completely wash away. Panicking entirely at the sudden waterworks, Gru violently flails his arms and frantically yells out, completely unsure of how to handle a crying girl. Smiling radiantly through her heavy tears, Elmo playfully blames his immense kindness for breaking her lonely resolve and repeatedly thanks him from the absolute bottom of her heart. Blushing furiously with a remarkably gentle smile, Gru tenderly pulls her head against his chest to comfort her, softly urging her to finally stop crying. The heavy emotional storm finally passes entirely, leaving the two to share a remarkably warm and peaceful dinner together at the wooden table. Night quickly falls over the quiet forest estate as the deeply tranquil atmosphere wraps securely around the isolated magical home. Slowly fluttering her eyes open, Elmo groggily tries to wake herself up for a brand new day, softly whispering a highly sleepy morning greeting. Suddenly, her sleepy gaze locks directly onto a highly unexpected sight right beside her, causing her eyes to widen in absolute, paralyzed shock. Resting incredibly peacefully on the very same pillow, the young mage slumbers soundly with a gentle, completely unguarded expression. Utterly frozen by the highly intimate proximity of the sleeping boy, Elmo lets out a completely breathless, deeply bewildered gasp. Her mind furiously struggles to properly process the wildly inappropriate situation as sheer, unadulterated panic begins to rapidly flood her entire system. Realizing they are intimately tangled together in the exact same bed, the terrified blonde girl unleashes a massively loud, wildly deafening scream of pure panic. Completely unbothered by her screaming, Gru slumbers peacefully while Elmo mentally short-circuits upon realizing his heavy arm is wrapped tightly around her. Trembling wildly under his heavy embrace, her mouth drops wide open in sheer disbelief as she completely fails to comprehend this highly compromising scenario. Thrashing violently to escape his tight grip, Elmo shoots straight up from the mattress with a blazing red face, screaming at the absolute top of her lungs. Clutching her fiercely burning cheeks in absolute agony, the traumatized girl desperately traces the horrifying events back to a massive mistake she made the previous night. Transported straight back to the previous evening, the highly dramatic narrative plunges into a crucial flashback to reveal exactly how this incredibly awkward situation manifested. Standing stubbornly before the single bed, both heavily and furiously insist that the other should take the highly comfortable mattress for the night. Fiercely acting like a true gentleman, Gru absolutely refuses to let a girl sleep on the floor while Elmo stubbornly argues she is perfectly fine doing so. Pushed to the absolute brink of frustration, A wildly blushing Elmo nervously stammers out the insanely bold suggestion that they just share the bed together. Desperately trying to end the endless argument, she loudly justifies her shocking proposal by pointing out they will absolutely get no sleep at all if they keep fighting. Visibly flabbergasted by her incredibly dangerous lack of caution, Gru yells back in utter disbelief, completely stunned that she would ever suggest sleeping next to a man. Attempting to inject pure logic into the highly tense situation, Elmo innocently claims it will be perfectly fine as long as they maintain a highly respectful distance. Sighing in incredibly heavy defeat, the thoroughly exhausted mage promises not to try anything funny and begrudgingly accepts her highly questionable compromise. Snapping violently back to the agonizing present reality, a deeply horrified Elmo instantly and massively regrets her incredibly rash decision from last night. Glaring down at the peacefully sleeping boy, the frantically blushing girl furiously mentally screams that casually sharing a bed with a man was a completely terrible idea. Glancing nervously at the boy beside her, Elmo realizes that Gru is still sleeping completely without a single care in the world. Desperately trying to calm her racing heart, she tightly shuts her eyes and tells herself to go to sleep quickly because she is definitely just overthinking things. Sitting up in the dim light, she anxiously admits that the whole situation is her fault while remembering that they were properly separated before falling asleep. Unbothered by her internal panic, the young mage continues to sleep incredibly peacefully as the morning light softly filters into the quiet room. Staring deeply at his incredibly handsome features, Elmo blushes fiercely as she realizes he really has a remarkably beautiful sleeping face. Suddenly opening his eyes with a gentle smile, Gru brightly wishes her a good morning while a completely flustered Elmo stammers out a greeting. Instantly breaking the peaceful atmosphere, Elmo frantically screams and violently demands to know why he was tightly hugging her while they slept. Startled and confused by her sudden outburst, Gru stammers in shock as Elmo violently throws off the covers and declares she is going to get ready first. Slamming the bedroom door tightly shut behind her, the heavily breathing girl leans against the wood in absolute, unfiltered panic. Clutching her violently pounding chest, Elmo desperately whispers that her fragile heart will never survive if every morning starts this chaotically. Tying her neat apron in the kitchen, Elmo lets out a startled gasp as a fully dressed Gru suddenly walks into the room. Quickly pivoting to domestic duties, the eager blonde girl formally asks the young mage if she is allowed to use the fresh ingredients lying around the kitchen. Gru warmly grants his permission while wondering if she is making the food herself, prompting Elmo to confidently propose a hearty breakfast menu. Flashing a remarkably determined smile, she enthusiastically insists on cooking breakfast to properly thank him for generously treating her to a meal last night. Realizing a crucial detail about his incredibly magical home, Gru suddenly asks if she possesses any magic powers since operating the strange stove requires it. Staring at him with wide, absolutely dumbfounded eyes, Elmo repeats the term in sheer confusion as the concept of possessing magic completely eludes her. Tapping her chin in deep contemplation, she fondly recalls using a magical measuring device back when she first enrolled at the academy. Estimating that she has an entirely average amount of magical energy, Gru quickly instructs her to simply try touching the magical stove to see what happens. Hesitantly pressing her delicate palm firmly against the intricate magical circle on the strange stove, Elmo wonders if this simple action will actually work. A brilliant, roaring flame instantly bursts to life beneath her hand, causing the utterly amazed girl to let out a loud gasp of sheer wonder. Excitedly cheering that the fire successfully lit, she listens eagerly as Gru explains that the circle operates by channeling her innate magical power. Proudly displaying his remarkable ingenuity, Gru explains he specifically designed the circle to require minimal magic so she can cook easily while he is away. Stepping closer to the eager girl, the tall mage effortlessly reaches up to open the overhead wooden cabinets to reveal the kitchen's hidden supplies. Thoroughly giving her a grand tour of his kitchen, Gru gently points out the seasoning box and cooking utensils while urging her to ask for help if needed. Carefully inspecting her culinary arsenal, Elmo excitedly notes the available olive oil, salt, pepper, and vinegar before pumping herself up to begin. Moving with incredible domestic grace, she efficiently prepares slices of simple toast perfectly seasoned with incredibly rich olive oil and fine salt. Cracking a fresh egg flawlessly over the hot magical stove, she expertly begins frying them to absolute, mouth-watering perfection. Finalizing her highly ambitious breakfast menu, the triumphant girl cheerfully finishes whipping up a vibrant salad and a steaming pot of rich onion consommé. Proudly carrying the beautifully plated food to the rustic wooden table, Elmo brightly apologizes for making the highly expectant mage wait. Clasping his hands together with immense anticipation, an incredibly impressed Gru marvels at the wildly delicious-looking spread before him. Bringing a steaming spoonful of the magnificent soup directly to his lips, the young mage takes his very first eager bite of her homemade cooking. Flashing an absolutely radiant, heartwarming smile, Gru loudly praises the delicious food and sweetly admits how amazing it feels to eat together with someone. Utterly frozen by his beautifully genuine compliment, Elmo's eyes widen as a profound, incredibly warm emotion violently pierces straight through her fragile heart. Staring at his beaming face, the completely overwhelmed blonde girl silently realizes that meals eaten together are truly the most special moments in the world. The incredibly delicious homemade breakfast completely vanishes from their wooden plates, leaving behind perfectly empty bowls that signify a wildly successful meal. Pressing their hands together in perfect, highly respectful unison, both Gru and Elmo happily give their absolute gratitude for the incredibly satisfying feast. Shifting the conversation to the busy day ahead, Elmo boldly announces her plan to interview at the bakery while Gru mentions he will be leaving before noon. Reaching across the table with deep concern, the highly protective mage hands her a mysterious object, firmly instructing her to use it if she faces any danger. Staring down at the beautifully engraved, magical item in her palm, an incredibly confused Elmo notes that it closely resembles a simple, thick card. Revealing its incredible communication powers, Gru excitedly explains that speaking into its magical circle will transmit her voice directly to his matching card. Testing the magical artifact with absolute awe, Elmo speaks a single word into it, and Gru happily confirms that he can hear her crystal-clear voice. Lowering his tone to emphasize its massive value, Gru seriously warns her that it is an incredibly precious artifact and she must protect it well. Clutching the vital lifeline tightly against her chest, a fiercely determined Elmo loudly promises to take absolute care of the precious magical gift. Throwing his heavy, highly official mage's cloak over his broad shoulders, Gru finalizes his preparations to leave the quiet forest estate. Stepping toward the door, Gru officially announces his departure while fiercely warning the naive girl not to follow any dangerous weirdos in town. Flashing a remarkably gentle and reassuring smile, Elmo tells him she completely understands and softly urges the young mage to be careful out there. Standing warmly in the doorway, the runaway girl watches his retreating back with a massively grateful heart as he ventures out into the dense woods. Pumping her fists with blazing, absolutely fiery determination, Elmo enthusiastically vows to give it her absolute all during her upcoming bakery interview. The scene completely shifts as the intensely bright sun falls away, leaving a massively beautiful, glowing full moon hanging directly over the shadowy forest silhouettes. Striding powerfully through the incredibly dense and magical woodland, the serious young mage embarks on his highly important, mysterious nighttime mission. Sitting alone at the base of a massive tree, a cloaked boy gently holds a faintly glowing object in his hand. Flushed with a heavy blush, the young boy nervously clutches a handful of freshly picked leaves. With sudden and nervous tension, his hand tightens to completely crush the fragile green leaves within his grasp. Peering out from beneath his hood, he softly breaks the silence with a quiet greeting. Moving with quick precision, he rustles his satchel as he stows his belongings away. Elsewhere, his black-haired brother, Elmo, holds up a magical communication card to ask if he can hear him. Responding through the magical connection, the cloaked boy anxiously asks what is wrong. Elmo replies that he simply wanted to say goodnight and share a quick update. Apologizing for the late call, Elmo eagerly shares that he got the job and will start working at the bakery tomorrow, to which his brother, Gru, warmly congratulates him. Smiling softly into the night, Elmo bids his brother a final goodnight before ending the magical call. Left alone in the quiet wilderness, Gru gazes up at the softly glowing branches of the massive tree. Tilting his head upward into the night sky, Gru observes that the moon is almost full. Sitting in the quiet isolation of the woods, he reflects that he is usually perfectly fine being on his own. Clutching his chest in confusion, he wonders what people normally do in situations like this since it is the first time he has ever felt such an overwhelming emotion. Staring at the luminous full moon, he questions if the right path is to simply keep pushing forward endlessly. Filled with crushing doubt, he fears that if he pushes too hard and she ends up hating him, he will never be able to recover from the heartbreak. Thinking of a beautiful blonde girl, he desperately wants to believe his granny's reassuring words, but he remains terrified that she might run away if she discovers his true identity. Deciding it is no use dwelling on it, Gru stands up with a sigh and resolves to head home because he desperately wants to see his older brother, Elmo. Peeking carefully through a thick canopy of leaves, Gru softly calls out to his brother. Staring out with a mix of vulnerability and longing, Gru seeks out Elmo's familiar presence. Approaching his brother from behind, Gru earnestly asks if Elmo ever felt this confusing way in the past. In a playful flashback to the bakery, a chibi-sized Elmo cheerfully observes his beautiful blonde coworker presenting freshly baked bread. Turning her attention away from the baked goods, the blonde girl happily calls out Elmo's name. Brimming with enthusiastic energy, she holds a heavy basket of bread and cheerfully affirms him. With a polite and apologetic smile, she asks if Elmo could handle the cash register for a moment. Determined to do a good job, Elmo throws himself into the task with an enthusiastic confirmation. Working diligently at the register, Elmo reflects that while his first week at the bakery has been incredibly tough, he has finally gotten used to the grueling pace. Stunned by his own competence, Elmo realizes that the countless days he spent working in his past life just to buy Otome games have surprisingly prepared him for this moment. Handing a bagged loaf to a satisfied customer with a bright smile, Elmo thinks to himself that he desperately needs to become independent soon. Suddenly, the quiet atmosphere of the bakery is broken as the front door swings open with a sharp creak. Greeting the new arrival, the blonde coworker lets out a surprised gasp of recognition. A handsome, light-haired man named Jen enters with a confident smirk and notes that he hasn't seen Elmo's face around the shop before. Warmly welcoming Jen, the blonde girl confirms that they did indeed hire someone new. Standing politely, Elmo introduces himself to Jen, explaining that he has been working at the bakery since last week. Leaning in far too close, Jen asks for Elmo's age, and upon hearing that Elmo is 18, laments that he wishes he were 10 years younger. While Elmo stands in shocked confusion, the protective coworker instantly scolds Jen for asking if Elmo has a boyfriend, firmly shutting down his flirtatious advances. Chuckling effortlessly, Jen holds out his hand and jokes about putting his own name in the running, smoothly brushing off the rejection. Blinking in utter bewilderment, Elmo lets out a confused breath at the handsome man's audacious behavior. Outside the bustling bakery, the wooden sign swings gently in the bright afternoon breeze. Having successfully sold off his magical wares, Gru notes to himself that his potion delivery is finally complete. Checking the town clock, Gru realizes it is still quite early and decides he might as well go check out how Elmo is doing at the bakery. Approaching the charming storefront, Gru takes a moment to appreciate the mouth-watering smell of fresh bread drifting into the street. Peering cautiously through the large glass window, Gru wonders aloud if his older brother is actually working properly. Inside the bakery, Elmo suddenly stops dead in his tracks, his eyes widening behind his glasses in complete shock. Framed by the window panes, Jen is seen standing intimately close to the blonde coworker, creating a startlingly romantic tableau that shocks Gru. Looking up at Jen, the blonde girl blushes deeply, her expression soft and hopelessly charmed. Basking in Jen's flattering attention, the girl closes her eyes and bursts into a joyful, sparkling laugh. Watching this tender interaction from the cold shadows outside, Gru's face contorts into a portrait of absolute devastation. Oblivious to the heartbreak outside, Jen steps out of the bakery with a cheerful farewell, praising their hard work for the day and promising to see them tomorrow. Exhausted but victorious, Elmo steps outside into the fresh air, letting out a heavy sigh of relief that he somehow survived his first week. Carrying her freshly acquired bread, Elmo cheerfully celebrates her good fortune. A mysterious cloaked figure pauses in the shadowed alleyway as he notices a familiar silhouette. Dropping his heavy hood, Gru turns in surprise as he and Elmo instantly recognize each other. Noticing his sudden shift in demeanor, Elmo anxiously asks if something is wrong. A heavy shadow falls over Gru's face as he cryptically mentions seeing her just moments ago. Turning away sharply, Gru dismisses her concern and stubbornly claims it is absolutely nothing. Elmo's eyes widen with curious skepticism at his unconvincing, abrupt denial. Sensing his deliberate detour, Elmo challenges his erratic path as they stray far from the route home. Marching ahead with a darkened expression, Gru completely ignores Elmo's bewildered protests. Trailing slightly behind, Elmo silently agonizes over whether she mistakenly did something to upset him. Gru continues his relentless, fast-paced stride as Elmo struggles to keep up with his agitated pace. Deeply disappointed, Elmo laments losing the chance to excitedly share the details of her new job. Her gaze falls to the ground as a wave of silent dejection washes over her. Her melancholy is suddenly broken when a voice kindly asks what is wrong. Realizing their true destination, Elmo points out they have arrived at the old lady's house. Gru confidently shouts his arrival to the grandmother, declaring he is coming to take some vegetables. Surprised by his casualness, Elmo questions if he is actually allowed to just grab them. Tossing off his heavy cloak, Gru reassures her and commands her to drop her bags to join him. He gently gestures for her to step forward into the hidden backyard space. Elmo gasps in sheer, wide-eyed amazement at the unexpected sight. A sprawling, vibrant cornfield stretches out beautifully behind the property. Gru explains he earns the crops through hard field work, revealing a secret garden completely hidden from the street. Confirming it is indeed a cornfield, Gru announces that harvest time has officially arrived. Gru stares in utter disbelief as Elmo confesses this is her very first time harvesting vegetables. Presenting a freshly picked ear of corn, Gru easily captures Elmo's sparkling, excited attention. With practiced precision, he expertly begins peeling the green husks away. Elmo watches his capable hands with intense, blushing fascination. Gru suddenly flinches as an unexpected sensation catches him off guard. Stumbling through the tall stalks, Elmo nervously apologizes for accidentally bumping into his side. Gru steals a quiet, hesitant glance in her direction. Elmo clutches her chest, processing the quiet tension lingering heavily between them. A woven basket quickly fills to the brim with their freshly harvested corn. Walking back side by side, Elmo cheerfully suggests turning their harvest into warm corn soup. Her thoughtful expression shifts as she finally reaches an emotional breaking point. Planting her feet firmly in the dirt, she brings her forward momentum to a complete halt. Gru turns back in surprise as Elmo boldly calls out his name. Startled by her sudden intensity, Gru fully faces her with a bewildered expression. Unable to hold back anymore, Elmo demands to know why he is acting so strangely and if she is the cause. Sweating and stammering, Gru struggles to formulate a coherent excuse. Elmo pierces him with an unwavering, demanding glare. Cracking under her intense pressure, Gru finally surrenders and agrees to confess. He lowers his head, bracing himself to unleash his pent-up frustration. Exploding with fierce insecurity, Gru angrily accuses Elmo of secretly dating someone else. Elmo's breath catches in her throat as sheer shock completely paralyzes her features. Shattering the tension, Elmo unleashes a deafening, bewildered scream of absolute denial. Leaning in furiously, Elmo aggressively clarifies that she has absolutely no romantic partner. Desperate to justify his intense jealousy, Gru brings up the guy he saw her getting closely acquainted with at the bakery. Gru bitterly explains he was only trying to respectfully distance himself from another man's girlfriend. The sheer ridiculousness of the misunderstanding suddenly shatters Elmo's composure, sending a stifled snort through the air. Flustered and embarrassed by her hysterical laughter, Gru finally realizes his massive, foolish mistake. Blushing furiously, Elmo stammers out that the entire situation was just a massive misunderstanding over a customer innocently picking lint off her hat. Utterly stunned by this anticlimactic revelation, Gru freezes completely as his wild, defensive jealousy instantly evaporates into thin air. Exhaling a colossal sigh of relief, Gru finally processes that his agonizing, heart-pounding ordeal was nothing more than a foolish misconception. Desperately trying to salvage his freshly shattered pride, Gru aggressively barks at Elmo to somehow stop her relentless, hysterical laughter. Rubbing his face in sheer exhaustion, he heavily mutters that his previous crushing anxiety now feels like a completely absurd lie. Gripping his hair in profound embarrassment, Gru visibly wrestles with the utterly humiliating reality of his massive overreaction. Observing his brightly glowing red ears, Elmo watches affectionately as Gru curses himself for acting like a paranoid, spinning loser. A sudden, thrilling realization sparks within Elmo's mind as she silently wonders if the usually stoic Gru was actually genuinely jealous. Shifting her attention back to her massive haul, Elmo finally brings up the tremendous, overflowing pile of bread she acquired earlier. Beaming with pure innocent pride, she explains that the generous bakers gifted her a mountainous surplus because they simply could not finish it all. Pouting slightly, Elmo softly admonishes Gru by revealing she desperately wanted to share this exciting news with him much sooner. Groaning under the crushing weight of his guilt, Gru quickly deflects her light-hearted scolding by loudly reminding her that he already apologized. Desperate to make amends, Gru enthusiastically promises to cook dinner tonight to finally let himself off the hook for his incredibly foolish behavior. A sudden, sharp exclamation of pain escapes as clumsy footing momentarily disrupts their deeply peaceful reconciliation. Reaching out with lightning speed, Gru firmly steadies the stumbling Elmo with a deeply protective and reassuring grip. Offering to carry all her heavy bags, Gru softly asks for her absolute forgiveness while apologizing sincerely for the day's turbulent drama. Turning her head with a teasingly playful smirk, Elmo silently revels in the delightful, affectionate power she currently holds over the massive man. Feigning deep contemplation, Elmo wickedly wonders aloud what she should do while Gru pitifully begs her not to be extraordinarily mean. Time skips forward as Elmo patiently stands by a bustling city walkway, excitedly waiting for her towering companion to finally arrive. Spotting his familiar, imposing silhouette slicing through the dense crowd, Elmo cheerfully calls out Gru's name with boundless enthusiasm. Approaching with a remarkably soft expression, Gru warmly praises Elmo for her hard work as they happily reunite in the vibrant streets. Asking anxiously if he kept her waiting too long, Gru relaxes completely as Elmo happily assures him that everything is perfectly fine. Brimming with vibrant anticipation, Elmo eagerly agrees to set off as Gru officially initiates their highly anticipated shopping trip together. Stepping into the bustling marketplace, Elmo narrates that she desperately needs new, flexible clothes to comfortably assist with gathering medicinal herbs. The lively, sunlit streets absolutely explode with colorful vendor stalls and eager merchants hawking their incredibly diverse wares. Navigating the chaotic crowds shoulder to shoulder, the dynamic duo carefully surveys the sprawling sea of endless clothing options. Elmo's bright eyes continuously dart across the vibrant storefronts as she searches relentlessly for the perfect, durable adventuring gear. A sudden, awe-inspiring display of gorgeous garments completely steals Elmo's breath away as she gazes into the warmly illuminated window. Pausing immediately in his tracks, Gru's sharp eyes suddenly lock onto a specific, beautifully crafted piece hanging delicately in the shop. Calling for her immediate attention, Gru points intently toward the display while a curious Elmo asks exactly what has captured his interest. Staring directly at a remarkably elegant dress, Gru sincerely and boldly declares that the beautiful garment would look absolutely stunning on her. Thoroughly flustered by his unexpected fashion recommendation, Elmo gasps in total shock as Gru actually pleads with her to just try it on. Blushing furiously at the highly romantic suggestion, Elmo nervously admits that the frilly dress is incredibly cute but heavily hesitates. Sweating under the immense financial pressure, she desperately explains that they have already purchased too much and her shallow funds are completely depleted. Attempting to gracefully retreat, Elmo awkwardly suggests passing on the luxurious garment for today to avoid entirely emptying her limited wallet. Sinking into a deeply visible depression, Gru physically deflates like a sad puppy utterly crushed by her incredibly sensible rejection. Hitting her with a weaponized, intensely sorrowful stare of pure expectation, Gru aggressively channels an undeniably devastating puppy dog aura. Completely shattering under the immense weight of his adorable, pleading gaze, Elmo reluctantly surrenders and agrees to at least try it on. Stepping out tentatively from behind the heavy dressing room curtain, Elmo nervously calls out Gru's name while clutching the pristine fabric. Radiating an absolutely angelic aura, Elmo reveals herself perfectly fitted into the gorgeous, elegantly tailored dress that hugs her beautifully. Fidgeting anxiously under his intense, unblinking scrutiny, Elmo shyly asks if the beautiful, elegant outfit actually suits her everyday style. Utterly captivated by her overwhelming beauty, Gru stands completely paralyzed as a dark, ferocious blush aggressively overtakes his entire face. Showering her with a relentless barrage of explosive compliments, Gru breathlessly declares her absolute cuteness while the delighted shopkeeper thanks them. Glowing with absolute joy from his endless praise, Elmo silently vows to eventually purchase the lovely dress once her finances fully recover. Shocking Elmo to her absolute core, Gru suddenly slams his hard-earned money onto the counter and decisively orders the shopkeeper to bag it. Panicking wildly at his sudden, extravagant financial expenditure, Elmo frantically tries to physically stop Gru from completing the massive purchase. Flashing a deeply genuine and passionate smile, Gru dramatically declares he is buying it purely because he desperately wants to see her wear it. Completely short-circuiting at his incredibly smooth and fiercely romantic confession, Elmo stands absolutely frozen in a state of pure, blushing bewilderment. Stretching lazily in the quiet evening, Elmo releases a long, contented sigh into the cooling air. Turning to Gru with a radiant smile, she cheerfully declares that their intense shopping trip was an absolute success. Her energetic demeanor suddenly softens as she nervously stammers out a sincere, quiet apology for her earlier behavior. Looking down at her feet, Elmo confesses her deep, lingering guilt over constantly relying on his unwavering support. Listening quietly to her insecurities, Gru releases a soft, dismissive exhale through his nose. Lunging forward with lightning speed, he playfully and firmly flicks her forehead with his large fingers. Recoiling with a startled gasp, Elmo rubs her brow as Gru forcefully reminds her of the exact words he spoke earlier. Glaring intensely, Gru demands she wear the dress and aggressively insists he bought it simply because he wanted to. Commanding her to drop her useless anxieties, he smoothly shifts the subject to confirm her assistance with tomorrow's gathering mission. Beaming with renewed, vibrant enthusiasm, Elmo brightly accepts the upcoming task without a single ounce of hesitation. Satisfied with her fiery spirit, Gru officially calls an end to their day so they can prepare for tomorrow's extraordinarily early departure. Trailing slightly behind his massive frame, Elmo silently devises a secret plan for the exact moment she finally receives her paycheck. Determined to repay his boundless generosity, she firmly vows to eventually buy him an incredible, heartfelt present. The next morning arrives swiftly as Gru confidently announces the immediate, highly anticipated start of their crucial gathering mission. Summoning a massive, glowing magic circle beneath their feet, he reveals they will utilize teleportation magic to instantly reach the distant forest. Commanding her to hold on incredibly tight, Gru instructs a panicking Elmo to wrap her arms around his waist to permanently avoid separation. Bracing for the intense magical transit, Gru boldly shouts his final warning before forcefully activating the blinding teleportation spell. A deafening surge of arcane energy violently erupts around them as Elmo unleashes a terrified, high-pitched scream. Swirling vortexes of ethereal light entirely consume their vision as Elmo internally marvels at the terrifying, sheer power of teleportation magic. Sensing her overwhelming, paralyzing fear, Gru gently advises her to simply squeeze her eyes shut until the chaotic journey completely concludes. The roaring tempest of magical winds suddenly dissipates into the deeply tranquil, silent atmosphere of an ancient, unknown woodland. Releasing his protective hold, Gru softly announces their perfectly safe and flawless arrival at their secret destination. Opening her eyes hesitantly, Elmo gasps in pure, unadulterated awe at the sprawling, vibrant greenery exploding all around them. Staring wildly at the towering canopy above, she marvels aloud that they genuinely teleported across the entire kingdom in mere seconds. Her breathless wonder suddenly freezes in her throat as a chillingly familiar landscape violently sparks her deeply buried, otherworldly memories. Spotting a highly specific ring of unnaturally blooming flowers around a solitary tree stump, a massive, world-shattering realization crashes into her mind. She instantly recognizes the legendary spirit forest where heroine Lilia and Prince Eldred historically rescued a sacred white beast spirit during their childhood. Recalling the video game's strict magical barriers, she deduces that a secret, heavily guarded beastfolk village must lie hidden deep within these impenetrable woods. A precise navigational sequence echoes perfectly in her mind as she remembers the exact, complex directional code required to breach the hidden settlement. Nostalgic warmth violently floods her chest as she fondly recalls constantly visiting this beloved, dangerous territory to interact with the fascinating beastfolk. Standing completely frozen in a deep, nostalgic trance, Elmo entirely ignores her towering companion waiting patient beside her. Shattering her intense concentration, Gru firmly demands to know exactly what has completely captured her unwavering attention.